Our class gets in trouble 100 times throughout the rest of the day, mostly because we get caught reading under our desks in other classes, and every time that happens, Ms. Kravitz tells us we have to put our books away. But she says it with this little smile that makes us think she's maybe a tiny bit happy about our sneak reading. We're also getting in trouble because all the girls can't stop talking about soccer. Our time's almost up, and as soon as the end of day bell rings, the boys' team will change into their gear and run out to Field A behind the school, and we'll have to decide if we're running with them or sitting out the season. I try again to convince Laurel, but she doesn't change her mind. Sorry. Not even manager? I ask. Definitely not. It's okay, I tell her, because it's not her fault we won't have a team. It's Measley's. Our math teacher, Mr. Henney, is drawing a number line across the whiteboard, and Maximilian is copying it down in his graph paper notebook. He's also graphing equations on his TI-84 for fun, because Mr. Henney isn't moving quickly enough for him. He slides his calculator over to me. Shh. It makes me laugh, because he's the only person who would ever use a TI-84 calculator to tell his friend to shut her mouth during math class because he didn't want to miss counting down the number line. Then it hits me. Maximilian. He could be our manager. Who cares if he's not a girl? It's not like he's going to be on the field. He'd be sitting on the sideline, counting and recording, and he could even use his TI-84 and graph paper notebook if he wanted. Will you be our manager? Lots of counting. Math. I slide the calculator over to him. He taps the eraser of his pencil 4 times perfectly in the middle of a square on his notebook. I know what he's thinking. He's not one for groups. He's not one for after school. School's enough. I take the TI-84 back and type in, I'm not sure anyone else could count high enough to record all our goals. He laughs a little, and I type more. I promise we'll try to score an even amount of goals every game. He smiles and rolls his eyes at me. Please? He taps his eraser 4 more times. Okay. I jump up and press my hands on both his shoulders and say, thank you, and I don't even care that it's the middle of math class and that Mr. Henney caps his whiteboard marker again and stares at me.
What is going on today?
He asks. Then he leans against the board and accidentally erases from -2 all the way to +1 on his number line with the back of his shirt. We're trying to make a girls' soccer team, I tell him, and we're really close. He nods and says,
Well, that certainly is exciting.
And I think he's going to say,
But can't this wait until after class?
Because that's what teachers say about really important stuff, and I'm ready to say, no, actually, it can't. But instead, he says,
So, what do you need?
I tell him about the 11 girls who signed up and what Principal Measley said about a sub and a manager. Mr. Henney turns around and points to 11 on the number line, then makes 2 big, arcing bumps with his marker to 13. Maximilian stands up and says, Except I've just agreed to be their manager because I have outstanding skills in math. Kenny snickers and Morris mumbles, For the girls' team? But Maximilian just answers him back straight. Yes, for the girls' team. And even if that makes them snicker more, Eliana and Georgia and Quinn and Tess and Fern all pump their fists and say, Yes! And that makes Maximilian smile. Then he takes a funny little bow and sits back down. Mr. Henney says, Sweet! And bumps his marker from 11 to 12 and makes a point.
1 more to go,
he says. On our way back to homeroom at the end of the day, we see the other classes in the hall again, and we tell Emmy about Maximilian. She goes to give him a high five, but I tell her he doesn't do high fives. I do these, he says, and puts out his fist. They connect knuckles and laugh, and Emmy says, "Maybe Measley will let us play with 11 plus a manager?" But we all know Principal Measley, so we all know he won't. When we get back to homeroom, Ms. Blaze is sitting at a table with the new girl and 2 other grown-ups. The girl's hands are flying 100 miles per hour, and she's not just using her hands. She's using her whole face and her whole body. One of the grown-ups smiles, and the other must be the interpreter because she speaks out loud to Ms. Blaze, telling her what the girl just said.
I'm already reading a book I really like. It's called The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963.
She says. "Wonderful," Ms. Blaze replies. And the interpreter puts up her hands, palms out toward the girl, then moves them down. Wonderful. We all go in to take our seats, and the 4 of them stand. The new girl hardly comes to Ms. Blaze's shoulder. She's short and skinny and wears glasses and braces and little kid jeans with hearts embroidered all the way down, and looks more like she's in 4th grade than 6th. And I wonder what it must be like to see us all coming in, zipping up our sweatshirts and our backpacks, our mouths moving, but not be able to hear what we're saying. I wonder if it's just silent or if it sounds like we're mumbling, like when you're underwater, or if there's some kind of background sound like a mosquito buzzing by your ear. Then I see that Ms. Blaze is pointing to Eliana and me, and the new girl smiles and walks right over to us. And I'm expecting her to be nervous because she looks like she'd be shy, but she's not nervous at all. She waves her hand in a salute, and the interpreter says,
Hi.
I say hi back, which immediately makes me feel stupid because I know she can't hear me. The interpreter does the wave salute back to her, but the girl is watching my lips instead of the interpreter, and I think she could see the hi there because she smiles. Then her hands start moving quickly and easily, and her interpreter tells us what she's saying.
Ms. Blaze told me you're starting a girls' soccer team. I can play.
We all scream, and she can definitely see that because she starts jumping up and down. Ms. Kravitz is introducing the new girl to the class, but I can't pay attention because my heart is beating team, 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 team. And I can't wait to find the girls from the other classes, and I can't wait to storm field day and ask Principal Measley when our practices start. The bell rings, and we all run out the door, the new girl and her interpreter, and Maximilian too. And when we see Emmy and Micah in the hallway, I say, "We have a team!" and lift the new girl's arm in the air like she's just won a wrestling match. The interpreter is signing everything we're saying, which is mostly just yes and woohoo. Then Emmy whispers to Eliana and me, "Who is that? Is she new?" And I realize we were too excited and never even learned her name. Eliana puts her hand out toward the new girl and says, "I'm A." I reach out and say, "I'm B." The girl shakes our hands, and the interpreter holds up her fist, a strong, tight, powerful-looking sign for A. Then she points to me and flattens her hand and tucks her thumb across her palm like it's hiding, for the letter B. I'm thinking, of course Eliana even gets a cooler sign. The girl smiles and gives that high salute again. Then she points to herself, and I watch the fingers on her right hand fly. Then both her hands start moving together and stop in the curved C shape twice. The interpreter says,
My name is Cecilia Monroe, but everybody calls me Cece.
Cece laughs and points to Eliana and gives that powerful fist sign. Then she points to me and makes the flat hand-thumb hiding sign. Then she points to herself and holds up her double-pulsed C sign. The interpreter smiles and says,
A, B, Cece.
11. Principal Measley is setting up bright orange cones on field day, and the boys' team is sitting in a circle, with Bryce in the middle leading stretches. Principal Measley probably saw that he got rec soccer MVP last year and made him captain on the first day. Bet he didn't see his championship-stealing offside goal. We're walking across the field, all of us, the whole girls' team, and a couple of the boys start looking up and pointing, "Coach!" Wyatt yells, and Principal Measley stops what he's doing. When we reach the 18-yard line where Principal Measley is standing, he shakes his head and says,
"Are you all really joining the boys? With a team this big, you won't get much playing time."
"No," I say. The interpreter signs no by closing her first two fingers and thumb together in a way that really looks like a no. "We're our own team," I say. 12 players and a manager. The interpreter signs team with 2 fists. She tucks her thumbs under her pointer fingers and moves both fists out and around in a big circle and closes them hard for team. He starts counting us, and when he gets to Maximilian, he stops.
"Maximilian?"
"I'm the manager," he says, "for the girls." Principal Measley lets out a little laugh, and Kenny and Morris follow him, and then Bryce follows them until most of the boys' team is cracking up. And I feel a fire in my gut because they might all cling together like little molecules, but we can too. Before I can even think of what to say back to all their laughing, I can hear Ms. Kravitz's voice in my head. "What's so funny?" I ask Measley. "I hear you laughing, so I want to check in about that. Do you think it's funny that Maximilian, who is very organized and excellent at math, is our manager?" Principal Measley looks at me like I better hold my tongue, but I won't. And neither will Aliana, because she steps up right next to me and says, "You told us 12 players and a manager. Here we are. When do we start?" He takes a breath.
"It's not that easy, girls. There's a registration fee for entering you in the league, and getting a coach costs money too. And if you aren't serious, then it's not worth—"
"We are serious," Tess cuts in. He raises his eyebrows at her.
"You've already quit once before,"
he says. "I quit the boys' team," she responds.
"I have practice right now, girls. We'll have to talk about this another time."
He starts laying down the rest of the orange cones. All the boys stand up, some still laughing, and start dribbling balls in the coned-in area.
"Quick feet!"
Measley yells. Then Emmy steps up, and so does Micah and Quinn, and then Georgia and Nell, too. "But—" he blows his whistle, drowning out our voices. Then Cece reaches up and taps him on his shoulder. Her hands make 3 clear signs. The interpreter stands next to her and says the words slowly, just the way Cece signed them.
"We aren't disappearing."
And the whole team says, "Yeah!"
"You'll miss your bus,"
Measley says, and nods toward the school.
"Go on."
We tell him we'll be back tomorrow with our gear. Then we all turn and walk together to catch our buses, and we say bye to Cece and the interpreter and her mom, who was waiting outside the school with Ms. Blaze and Ms. Kravitz. And I give Maximilian a fist bump and tell him thanks again. He takes off across the field and into the woods, onto our old path, past our tree, and home to the condos. When I get on the bus, I sit across the aisle from Aliana again. I have the list in my hands, and I take a pen from my backpack and write in the last 2 names. A. Absalon, B. Embers, Georgia Ludlow, Quinn Williams, Fern Mandley, Tess Rogers, Emmy Powers, Jamie Burgess, Nell Emerson, Micah Bond, Kara Elroy, Cece Monroe. Manager, Maximilian Lee. Measley better get us a coach and a schedule and some uniforms right away, I say. Knock on his door tomorrow before school? Aliana asks. I nod my head. And at lunch, too. And recess. And whenever we walk past on our way to the bathroom. Until he says okay, she says. It's a plan. We don't say anything the rest of the ride, and we don't do the awkward race walk thing down Evergreen Road that we did yesterday. It's a little windy, so I zip up my sweatshirt, and she pulls the two sides of her sweater together and ties the band of it around her waist in a bow. The sweater is as long as a dress, which seems like it would be annoying. Annoying like a dress. We're almost back at our houses when she says, "So what's it like living with Bryce? Is that weird?" At first, I want to tell her it's none of her business. But instead I say, "Super weird." "I bet," she says. "And it's not just him," I tell her. "It's his two older brothers, his dad, his two dogs, his cat, and all the weird stuff I know that I feel like I shouldn't know." "Like what?" she asks. "Like what color his toothbrush is." "Super weird," she says. We reach our driveways and I say, "Yeah, it was better when it was just my mom and me." Eliana nods and looks down at the ground, and I'm thinking I should ask her a question too, so I say, "What happened to the park by your old apartment?" "Swanky new building," she says. And even though I don't know exactly what swanky means, I can tell it's not as cool as a park with soccer fields. She pulls the band of her sweater tighter around her waist, says she'll see me tomorrow, and turns up her driveway. Just as I'm about to punch in the garage code, I hear her call, "B, what color's his toothbrush?" I smile and yell, "Purple, with glitter stars." We both laugh and wave bye and head into our houses. Mom is in the living room doing exercises on the floor that I think might be yoga. I sit down on the rug next to her.
"You're not at soccer practice," she says. "That's not a good sign."
She drops her position and sits down cross-legged on the rug next to me. Her belly swells out toward her lap.
"Tell me."
"We got another player to sign up, and Maximilian is going to be our manager."
"Oh, Maximilian,"
Mom says.
"That's so perfect."
"But Principal Measley says we'll have to talk about it another time, like it still might not happen even though we did what he said." She shakes her head and says, "Uh-oh." And I'm thinking she's talking about Measley. But then she grabs her belly and closes her eyes. "Mom?" Cameron and Tucker come in the door laughing at something, and Mom takes a big huffing breath and opens her eyes. "Mom?"
"I'm okay,"
she says. But then she closes her eyes again and breathes, and I move closer to her and put my hand on her back. Cameron and Tucker put their bags down.
"Louise?"
The baby's not due for 5 more weeks, so I know it can't be time. But Mom says in a steady voice,
"Cameron, my keys are on the counter. I think I'm going to have you drive me to the doctor, just in case. I'm sure it's nothing."
My heart starts to beat fast, and I can feel the blood pumping through my ears. "I'm coming too," I say. "Me too," says Tucker. He helps Mom up, and Cameron runs to the car and opens the passenger door. Tucker and I get in the back, and everyone buckles up, and Cameron starts the car and reverses fast out of the driveway.
"Cameron," Mom says, "you are not an ambulance driver."
That makes us all laugh, and I feel a little better just hearing my mom being my mom, even if she's breathing all gaspy and huffy. Tucker takes out his cell phone and calls Wendell.
"He'll get Bryce and meet us there,"
he says. When we get to the hospital, Cameron drops us off and goes to park the car.
"Meet us in labor and delivery,"
Mom says. "But it's too early, Mom, right?" I say.
"I'm just going to have them check me, and then we're going home."
She says it calm, but I can tell she's a little worried because even though she's breathing deep, she's got her arms wrapped under her belly like she's trying to keep that baby in there. Someone rolls in a wheelchair, and Mom holds out a hand.
I'm fine.
Tucker pushes it along next to her, just in case, and Mom keeps her other arm around my shoulders, and I'm not sure who's holding who up. The nurses in labor and delivery hand Mom a clipboard, and Mom says, "I'm 35 weeks." She kisses the top of my head, and then she kisses Tucker's too, and I'm wondering when she started kissing their heads like that, but I'm not even mad about it because I'm glad he's there. A nurse tells Mom to sit in the wheelchair, and Mom says, "I'll be right back. This will be nothing." Cameron and Wendell and Bryce all get to the waiting room at the same time, and Wendell is asking 100 questions, and the nurses are saying they're going to get as much information as they can, and then Wendell sits down. No, he doesn't sit down. He collapses and falls down on a chair in the waiting room, and he buries his head in his hands and cries. And I'll tell you one thing. I've seen Wendell cry before. Lots. That proud, happy snort cry. But I've never seen him cry like this. And it scares me. The nurse is trying to give him a cup of water and tell him that she's sure she'll have news on his wife soon. Cameron smiles at the nurse and takes the cup of water, and I know what his smile is saying. It's saying that he's crying about more than that. He's crying about the last time he rushed to a waiting room like this, 11 years ago, with baby Bryce in his arms and Cameron and Tucker clutching his sides. It was Mom's first day back to work after I was born, and they were the first people she saw. Wendell and Cameron and Tucker and baby Bryce. Crying. All crying. In the seats next to me, Cameron, Tucker, and Bryce slump over Wendell, and they're a pile of arms and shoulders and hair, and I'm trying to figure out if I should sit right next to their heap or skip a chair, when an arm reaches out, and I'm not even sure whose arm it is, but it's pulling me in, and then I'm a part of the huddle too, and I don't even really mind that I'm squished in tight to Bryce. It feels like 100 years until a doctor comes out and tells us Mom is doing great and we can see her. We follow her down the hall and into a room where Mom is lying in a bed. She has a bunch of wires connected to her belly and a monitor above her head that's ticking and beeping and feeding out a long piece of paper like a slow printer. The doctor explains to us that Mom was having some contractions, but she isn't actually in labor yet. She says some things I don't understand about the baby's heartbeat and lungs and Mom's blood pressure, and how she may be at risk for preterm labor.
"We want to keep that baby in there for as long as possible,"
she says. Wendell is holding Mom's hand, and Cameron and Tucker are on one side of the bed, and Bryce and I are squeezed in on the other. The doctor says she'll give Mom a shot that will help the baby's lungs develop a little quicker, in case it comes early. Then Wendell asks about Mom's heart. He clears his throat and says,
"The boy's mom died here. Peripartum cardiomyopathy. Is there a chance? Have you—"
There are tears on Wendell's face.
"Louise's heart is healthy,"
the doctor assures him. Then she looks at all of us and says,
"I don't blame the baby if it tries to come early."
She smiles.
"Babies know, even from the inside, what a great family they have waiting for them."
That gets Wendell snorting and squeezing Mom's hand, and Mom doesn't even tell him to cut it out. The doctor tells us they're going to keep Mom overnight, and she can go home in the morning.
But no more high-action ambulance work.
She looks right at my mom and says,
"Desk work, Louise. No more work overnights. Slow walks. Easy stretches."
And when Mom sighs, the doctor says,
"For the baby."
I look back at the doctor and give her a nod like, even if my mom is in embers, and it's hard for an embers to be still, I got this. I lean down to hug Mom, and she kisses me on the top of my head and says she loves me all the way up to the Care Bears, and that makes my eyes burn. But before I let any tears leak out, I bite my tongue in the back of my mouth and blink fast. Wendell puts his arm around me, and we all 5 walk out together. And I'll tell you one thing. It doesn't actually feel so bad being all linked up with the Valentines right now. And I'm thinking about what the doctor said about the baby knowing its family. And I'm wondering if the baby can really hear us already. So I make a little promise to myself that I'll try to say nicer things. I call Grandma B on Tucker's cell phone on the way home and tell her about Mom. She asks 100 questions, and I try to answer them all, but I didn't understand everything the doctor said, except that Mom was going to be okay, and she has to stop working overnight shifts. Only desk work, no more ambulance rides.
Thank goodness,
Grandma says. I call Aunt Tam and tell her the same thing. I can tell she's worried because her voice shakes, but she says okay, and thanks for calling. When we all get back to the house, Wendell takes 3 pizzas out of the freezer. They won't all fit in the oven at one time, so we cook 2, then slide another one in while we're eating those. And I can tell we're all thinking about my mom, and maybe theirs, because it's pretty quiet, which it never is, until Cameron takes a long drink of water and says,
"She'll be fine. The baby, too."
"Yeah," says Bryce. Wendell stretches his arms around us, and we all kind of lean in over the counter and put our heads together.
"I know,"
Wendell says.
"We're all so lucky to have each other."
I'm crunched in right close to Bryce again, but I am feeling lucky. Lucky that Mom's okay and that she was there 11 years ago to hand Wendell cups of water and boxes of raisins and a warmed bottle of formula in the waiting room of the ER. And lucky that she ran into him a year later with Bryce and me in front-facing packs on their chests at the grocery store, days after they had moved to our town. The story goes, Bryce and I took one look at each other and started crying. So I guess I'm lucky, too, that over the years, they became friends anyway. And then better friends. And now we're all here huddled around the counter with pizza. Wendell's about to start snorting again when that awful doorbell starts to chime. I open the door when it's halfway through its song, and Grandma B is standing there with a whole pound bag of M&Ms.
"I just missed you."
She comes in and hugs everyone, and we move dinner from the counter to the table, and Grandma B sits in Mom's seat and grabs a slice. She pushes the M&Ms to the middle of the table, and everyone says thanks for the dessert.
"Oh, no,"
Grandma B says.
"I don't believe in that dessert hogwash. You have to eat your sweet with the rest, because there's no time like the present."
Then she reaches over and takes a handful of M&Ms and tucks them beneath the layer of cheese on her pizza. She takes a big bite and smiles.
"Like that,"
she says with a full mouth. Then everyone, even Wendell, is tucking M&Ms beneath their cheese and hollowing out the crust and restuffing it with their favorite colors. And just as Bryce is reaching for another fistful, I hear a knock, knock, knockety knock on the front door. Then another knock, knock, knockety knock. And I'd know that knock anywhere. It's Aunt Tam's shared wall goodnight knock. I jump up and knock, knock, knockety knock back, and then open the door, and she's standing there with a thermos of hot chocolate. "I made too much," she says. Cameron gets out 7 mugs and fills each one halfway, and Aunt Tam grabs a stool from the counter and squeezes in between Cameron and me. Wendell says,
"We don't need to tell Louise we had pizza, M&Ms, and hot chocolate for dinner."
We all laugh and sip and reach for more slices. Then, Cameron tells us that he talked with his teacher, and they scheduled his 2-day fake baby assignment for a time next month when he didn't have any college interviews, but that he'd have to take the baby to morning swim practice.
"Fake baby?"
Grandma B asks. Cameron fills her in on his behavioral science class, and the crying doll, and the wrist-locked key, and Aunt Tam smiles and says, It can't cry more than little Bee did."
"You can say that again,"
Grandma adds and smiles like she's remembering.
"That's my girl. Never settle."
And I know that means I never settled as a baby. That I clenched my fists and protested and used my voice at full volume. But I also know that Grandma's telling me to never settle. Never settle for what doesn't feel right and fair. And I'll tell you one thing, Principal Measley shrugging off our list and all our questions about soccer doesn't feel right and fair. And I'm not going to settle. Grandma Bee leans across the corner of the table for a secret little Embers Girls fist bump, then takes a few M&Ms from the bag and drops them into her hot chocolate. Bryce is next to try it, and then all our hands are grabbing extra M&Ms and watching them sink to the bottom of our mugs where they melt into colorful clumps. We have to dig them out with a spoon, and it's delicious.
"Never tried that before,"
Grandma Bee says, licking her spoon.
"I like it."
Everyone's laughing and has melty chocolate mustaches, and I'm thinking that I might like this new table, and that I wish Mom were here because if the baby really can hear us from the inside, this would be a good moment to listen in on. Aunt Tam hugs everyone before she leaves, and she squeezes Wendell and Cameron and Tucker and Bryce just as long as she squeezes me. And I'm thinking, that's okay. We're all worried about Mom and the baby, and maybe, just this once, we're all starting to feel more like a team. Grandma Bee stays and watches the Red Sox game with me and Wendell and Cameron and Tucker and Bryce. And even though baseball is 100 times slower than soccer, Tucker jumps up every time the count is full, or there are 2 outs, and he yells at the TV like we're right there in the stadium, and that makes it fun to watch. Grandma Bee joins him, wildly cheering, and they both burst into loud woohoos and a full-on happy dance when we hit a home run. Bryce and I are sitting on the floor in front of the couch, leaning against Cameron's and Wendell's legs, and Grandma Bee and Tucker nearly trip over us during their home run celebration. Bryce and I pull our knees to our chests and roll our eyes at them at the same time. That kind of gets us laughing, and I'm thinking that Bryce's laugh isn't so bad when he's not being a bully follower. And I wonder what Kenny and Morris would think if they could see Bryce around our big table, or taking care of Dodger and Roscoe and Fred, or right now, with all of us, laughing at his wildly dancing big brother and his not Grandma Bee. He's a different person in these in-between times. And I'm wondering if Kenny and Morris are too. Grandma Bee tucks me in before she leaves, and I scooch over to give her a seat on the edge of my bed. I fill her in on Principal Measley and Maximilian being our manager, and the new girl, Cece, how she plays soccer and knows a whole language she can speak with her hands, and how Eliana and I are going to knock on Principal Measley's door again.
And again,
Grandma says,
"Give him hell. Min's mayonnaise."
I laugh and tell her I will, and pretend to spread Hellman's mayonnaise on a piece of bread. She smiles and pulls up Mom's old comforter.
3,
she says.
"Let's hear them."
But it's not morning. She waves her hand like that's not important.
"Things won't always go exactly the same way forever,"
she tells me.
"Now, give me 3, even if it's 8 hours early."
I smile and say, 1, that Mom and the baby are okay. 2, that Cece wants to play soccer. 3, M&Ms and hot chocolate.
"Those are good ones,"
she whispers, and kisses the top of my head. 12.